Hello and welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, coming to you with a solo video today. And we're going to get into a wide receiver breakdown between three guys that are going relatively close together in ADP, and they're back to back to back in my rankings at 14, 15, and 16. So without further ado, let's get into this trio of wide receivers. And the three guys we're going to be talking about today are Mike Evans, Michael Pittman, and DJ Moore. So this is definitely a critical part in the draft for superflex drafters, right? You're looking in the fourth round here with these three guys. DJ Moore sometimes slips into the early fifth, depending on the drafters that you're drafting with. And, you know, he's a little bit more controversial than these other two guys, I think. So that's a big reason why I added him here. And I do want to talk about him in the context of being a top 15 wide receiver, because he has all of the potential in the world to meet that. And so we'll get into him last, but we're going to start off this video with Mike Evans. It's really hard to deny what Mike Evans has been able to accomplish in his NFL career and what sort of impact he's going to make for your fantasy teams this season. He finished as wide receiver 5 last year after being drafted outside of the top 30 at wide receiver. Just a major value, a critical league winner in fantasy last year. You see his stats here. He had 79 receptions, 1,255 yards, and 13 touchdowns. So not only does he have major game-breaking upside, but he also scores a lot of touchdowns too. I swear he had a stat line where he had 2 catches for 2 yards and 2 touchdowns, right? He's on the goal line. He's heavily targeted in the red zone, but he also has that game-breaking ability to take the top off of defenses and go for 50-yard catches. So I don't want to undersell how good he is at all levels of the field and how good of a player he's just been throughout his entire career. He averaged 10.33 touchdowns over his last 6 seasons. I don't know if a lot of people have realized that, because he's played with 3 different quarterbacks over that time. So he's had Jameis Winston, right, slinging it, high yardage totals, high touchdown totals. He had 8 and 8 in those 2 seasons. And then Tom Brady came into the picture, and it was like, man, wings up in terms of how much his production excelled. He had 13 and 14 touchdown seasons with Brady, and then a 6 touchdown season, a little bit disappointing in his last year with Brady. And then he had 13 again last year with Baker Mayfield. So over that span, he finished in the top 10 4 different times. So he has just been a stud year over year over year. And it's why I have him back at 14. It's really hard to pass on Mike Evans as, your wide receiver 2 in the 4th round, because he just is so stable and he's so good. And the other thing about the offense is there's not a lot changing here. Like, I know the offensive coordinators could be different, so there will be a certain level of change in that aspect, but I can't imagine he's going to try and reinvent the wheel here. The offense was operating very well last year. Baker Mayfield was able to get the ball to Mike Evans, and he was doing this on a 23% target share too. So it's not like he was a major volume guy last year either, and still finished as wide receiver 5. I think that Mike Evans is an exceptional pick as your wide receiver 2. And even if you go like quarterback, running back in your first 3 rounds, and you get a player like Mike Evans to kick off your receivers, like or running back, quarterback, right? Like, if you like to go robust RB early in the draft, it's not something I recommend necessarily, but if that's your strategy and you get in on Mike Evans, I think that is an excellent strategy. That is who I would be picking of these 3 wide receivers in those scenarios, because I think his situation is such that he should be able to have not only just a very high ceiling finish, I do think he has a decent floor as well. I don't think, barring injury, he's gonna just like bottom out. So highly recommend drafting Mike Evans. And the lazy stat, or the cool stat, right, is that he's got 10 straight 1,000-yard seasons, and no other receiver in the history of the NFL has started their career with 10 straight 1,000-yard seasons. So I think he broke that record when he got to 8, and he's just kept it going. So barring injury again, I expect him to go over 1,000 yards. I expect him to be very close to double-digit touchdowns, if not going over double-digit touchdowns, and I think he is an excellent pick at that mid-tier wide receiver 2. Getting into the next guy, this guy is my favorite of the group. I just can't quit Michael Pittman for whatever reason. I was not the Michael Pittman guy when he got pushed into the top 10 a couple years ago, 2 years ago, I think it was. and he was getting drafted anywhere between 7 and 10, and I was like, I don't know, we haven't seen it. It's a little high for me. I don't think I'm ready to do that. I actually like bet against him finishing in the top 10 that year. I just don't think I wasn't in on it then. But since then, and now we're looking at him, and I'm much more in on him. I have him as wide receiver 15, so one spot behind Mike Evans. And my draw to him is how big of a target share he got, how much volume he got. You'll look on the screen, most of these stats are pertaining to volume here. So he had 109 receptions. I mean, that's literally 30 more receptions than Mike Evans last year. He finished with less yards, and the offense wasn't really as good as the Bucs offense was last year, but 1,152 yards and 4 touchdowns. And the touchdown number is the main thing that's holding him back, right? He had 4 touchdowns last year, 4 touchdowns the year before that, 2 touchdowns the year before that, and 1 touchdown as a rookie. So he has only scored 11 touchdowns in his whole career, which is less than Evans had last year, right? So the upside, I don't think is the same as it is with Evans, right? And if I'm picking my first wide receiver, I'm going to make a point to try and get Evans instead of Pittman, But for my second, I could see going with Pittman. And I've actually had mock drafts where I've taken Pittman instead, because I do think that the floor is very high. I expect improved quarterback play with Anthony Richardson taking over here. And, if Anthony Richardson becomes what we think he can become, I think that there's all the upside in the world here for Pittman in terms of more explosive plays, more touchdowns, because the offense is better overall. And so I am very high on Michael Pittman. Again, another guy I love in the 4th round. And it's a shame that you can't get both, really, right? Like, you could take one early in the 3rd round and then get Pittman in the 4th, but neither of these guys are lasting to the 5th round of superflex leagues. And again, when I talk about rounds within superflex context, if you're listening to us and you aren't a superflex player, just subtract a round roughly from what we're talking about. As you get a little later, subtract maybe 2 rounds, because more quarterbacks get into the fold within the 7th round. But when we're talking about the 4th round, right, in regular drafts, that's the 3rd round. If we're talking about the 3rd round in regular drafts, that's probably the 2nd or early 3rd. So just push these guys up just a little bit around, though, for these guys in regular leagues. Also, the last point I have here that I haven't hit on yet is that the talent is through the roof here. Pittman has very, very good talent, was drafted to be the number 1 guy, has been the number 1 guy since his 2nd season, and he's going into his 5th season now. I really think that he has shown that he earns the volume, he earns the targets, and that even though there are some analysts that break down how him and Josh Downs had the same number of targets with Anthony Richardson, I don't think that that's necessarily going to be the case over a full season, right? Very small sample sizes there. 3 broken games and 2 full games of Richardson. So, that's not exactly the best sample size to be projecting against when you're talking about targets. And I think that Pittman is going to earn a very high target share with Richardson this year. And I think that could translate into more explosive plays and more touchdowns, more scoring opportunities. So again, very high on Michael Pittman. I love Michael Pittman. And so I felt like I had to pitch him a little harder, because Mike Evans, is obviously the established player. He's a stud. And all of the numbers that I presented for Evans just highlight how good he's been and how good he can be again. But I do also think that Pittman is very deserving of high praise here. And I alluded to this at the beginning of the video a little bit. And DJ Moore is also another player that has a very, very high ceiling. He's got all the talent in the world. He was stuck on Carolina, and then last year comes to the Bears and finishes as wide receiver 6. I mean, he also is another one of these guys that has crazy upside here. And, that is surprising, I'm sure, to a lot of people listening, that he finished as wide receiver 6 in half-point PPR leagues last year, because a lot of it was driven by massive games. And so there wasn't necessarily week over week consistency in the way we want to see. Fields got hurt in the middle of the season, so he didn't have his quarterback all year, and it was kind of limping along in the middle of the year. So you might have had DJ Moore as your wide receiver 2, maybe even your wide receiver 3. And he just didn't even help you make the playoffs, or you were just struggling to make the playoffs because he wasn't doing enough for you. And then boom, another explosive week towards the end of the year. Fields comes back and he all of a sudden is just boom right back into the top 10 of weekly rankings. And so, I think everybody remembers the Thursday night football game last year where he scored 45 points. He had like 200 yards and 2 touchdowns or 3 touchdowns or whatever that was. I should have looked that up, but I didn't. But yeah, he had a massive game like in week 5 on Thursday night football. So that did fuel a lot of that week wide receiver 6 season last year. So you look at his overall numbers, right? He finished with 96 catches, 1,364 yards and 8 touchdowns. Overall, a very good season, right? It almost seems like he's a mix of the first 2 guys we talked about, right? He has the explosive playability. He's up over 14 yards or up over 13 yards of reception, and kind of split the difference in touchdowns between the 2 of them. So the negative with DJ Moore is his situation is the one that's changing the most of the 2, right? Like, you're going to be adding the starting quarterback back to Pittman, but the offense is the same. His role is the same. Same thing with Evans, right? The offensive coordinator changed, but it's like same quarterback, same receiver group, same running back group. So all the skill position guys are the same. Here, it's way different, right? The quarterback is changing. They drafted Caleb Williams. They brought in they brought in wide receiver competition, not only in the draft at the 9th overall pick, picking Rome Odunze, they also went and traded for Keenan Allen. So, there's going to be significant target competition, whereas last year there was none. So that's going to scare a lot of people off of DJ Moore, I think. And people will say, look, he's going to have to compete for target share in a way that he never has before on this offense. And it's going to be completely overhauled, different offensive coordinator, different, quarterback different, weapons different. So I get the people that are saying that. I will say 2 things to that. One of them I have written here, right? He's never finished lower than wide receiver 22. And he's being drafted in the ADP as wide receiver 22. Like, he's getting drafted at his floor. And we just saw what he can do in basically half a season with a legitimate quarterback. So I don't know that I understand. Like, even if he sees less targets, I still think he can put up decent volume, and he can have bigger plays. He'll have less defensive attention focused on him. And so I think that if you can get him as wide receiver 22, like there's no way you should be passing on him there. And I think, I have him at wide receiver 16. And so I definitely think that he is worthy of that 4th round, early 5th round selection in superflex leagues. Definitely 3rd, 4th round in your standard leagues. And the other thing I'll say that I alluded to just a second ago is I really think that the contract is going to speak for itself too. They just paid him big time. They gave him 4 years, over $100 million, and $83 million of that is guaranteed. Like, they're not just going to give him a contract like that and then not treat him as the number 1 receiver, especially when he is the established number 1 receiver. So I think, the other 2 pieces, Rome Odunze will be developing. I think he's going to have a decent role. Keenan Allen obviously is a veteran. He's a stud. He can get open, but he's going to be playing in the slot a lot more. We'll be playing on 2 wide receiver sets, I would guess. So DJ Moore is the one that's never coming off the field. DJ Moore is the one that the offense is going to run through. DJ Moore is the one I expect Caleb Williams to lean on. So I also really like DJ Moore, and I think that he's a very good pick here in that 4th, 5th round turn range, especially as your wide receiver 2, maybe even your wide receiver 3 at that point in the draft. Excellent value, and I think he's very worth the pick. And with that, I gave you my case for all 3 of these guys. The way I have it ranked is Evans at 14, Pittman at 15, DJ Moore at 16. But I will say that I really do think that all of these players are a good pick. There's no tier break here. I think that these guys, if you can get any one of the 3, you are in very good shape. The other guy I have ending this tier is Deebo Samuel right after these guys. But I really think that this is the focus of this tier right here, and the meat of this tier of wide receivers is these 3 guys, and you want to make sure that you try and get one of them on your fantasy teams this August.